Lembro-me das cartas, cartões e mensagens profundamente tocantes que muitos de vós enviaram a minha mulher. O Palácio de Buckingham está abalado após a divulgação de notícias de que o Rei Carlos terá exilado a Rainha Camilla para um mosteiro secreto. Este é também um momento de mudança para a minha família. Após um escândalo desastroso que supostamente arruinou um dos seus eventos reais mais importantes, aquele que deveria ser um momento histórico e de orgulho para a monarquia, transformou-se num caos absoluto, deixando o rei humilhado e furioso. Fontes internas afirmam que as consequências foram tão graves que Charles não teve outra alternativa senão agir de forma rápida e decisiva. Mas o que fez Camilla exatamente? Hoje, expomos a chocante verdade por detrás deste exílio real. A noite em que a coroa tremeu. A história que deu origem ao Windsor Whispering não começou com um decreto ou uma manchete. Começou com fumo. Um fumo espesso e espiralado subia do gabinete real, trazendo consigo o aroma de pergaminho queimado e orgulho. Dentro daquela sala silenciosa e centenária, a Rainha Camilla estava diante da lareira, as chamas pintando-lhe o rosto em tons de carmesim e dourado. Segurava na mão o plano oficial para o próximo banquete de Estado em honra do presidente alemão Frank-Walter Steinmeier, um evento que tinha levado semanas de meticulosa coordenação real. E ainda antes de a tinta da aprovação secar, Camilla acendeu um fósforo. Quando o Rei Carlos chegou, já era tarde demais. As pesadas portas abriram-se no momento em que viu o brasão real curvar-se à luz do fogo, os papéis transformando-se em cinzas. A voz dele estava tensa, meio descrença, meio fúria. Camilla, o que fizeste? A resposta dela foi calma, mas cortante. Estou a reescrever o meu lugar. Charles, não ficarei ao seu lado como uma decoração silenciosa. Não foi apenas um desafio, foi uma declaração. O que se seguiu nessa noite foi um caos envolto em silêncio. Os funcionários, jurados ao segredo, trocavam olhares ansiosos enquanto as notícias se espalhavam pelos corredores. A rainha tinha queimado os documentos da soberana. O rei despojara-a da sua autoridade. Ao amanhecer, o palácio, que antes se movia com precisão militar, operava agora como um fantasma, cauteloso, temeroso, incerto sobre qual a direção que a coroa tomaria a seguir. Lá fora, Windsor jazia sob uma névoa, como se o próprio castelo se quisesse esconder. Disse que Charles passou a manhã a andar de um lado para o outro nos seus aposentos, olhando para os jardins. A chuva batia no vidro enquanto se esforçava por formular uma declaração que acalmasse a tempestade sem revelar o incêndio. Quando o gabinete real finalmente se pronunciou, o anúncio foi breve. Os preparativos para o banquete prosseguiriam sob a supervisão direta do rei. Nenhuma única menção a Camilla. Na linguagem real, o silêncio diz muito. Do outro lado do corredor, Camilla estava sentada, acordada, com a vela a arder fracamente. Os criados sussurravam que ela não tinha dormido. Apenas fitava a luz trêmula. As sombras no seu rosto carregavam tanto desafio como desgosto. Para uns, parecia forte. Para outros, completamente destruída. Ambas as coisas podem ter sido verdade, porque o que ardeu naquela noite não foi apenas pergaminho. Foi a frágil paz que manteve o casamento real unido. As pessoas próximas do palácio sussurram sobre o que a levou a tais extremos. Anos de contenção. Anos a ser educadamente marginalizada, sentindo-se como uma nota de rodapé na grande narrativa da monarquia. Mesmo coroada, Camilla nunca esteve verdadeiramente livre de fantasmas, especialmente aquele cujo retrato estava pendurado nesse mesmo escritório. O rosto sereno de Diana parecia observar da moldura o desenrolar da discussão, os olhos brilhando à luz, julgando em silêncio. Alguns afirmam que Charles olhou para o retrato enquanto os papéis ardiam e, por um breve e assustador momento, a sala congelou. Depois daquela noite, nada mais parecia o mesmo. A rotina palaciana foi retomada, os sorrisos regressaram e o presidente alemão foi recebido com verdadeira elegância. Mas, por detrás de cada gesto polido, havia uma tensão demasiado profunda para ser escondida. Camilla compareceu, mas o seu nome não constava do programa impresso e a sua presença foi educadamente ignorada nas fotos oficiais. A multidão viu a perfeição, os que estavam por dentro, a fratura. Correram rumores de que Charles tinha discretamente restringido o seu acesso aos assuntos de Estado, garantindo que nenhuma nova revisão poderia ocorrer. No entanto, os rumores diziam também que Camilla estava a construir o seu próprio pequeno círculo de apoiantes leais, pessoas que acreditavam que a sua rebelião não era uma loucura, mas uma mensagem. Uma mulher coroada, terá dito, deve escolher entre a dignidade e o poder. Eu fiz a minha escolha. O que realmente ardeu naquela noite de outubro foi mais do que papel. Foi uma ilusão. A monarquia, construída sobre a compostura e o silêncio, revelaram uma fenda que nenhuma cerimônia poderia esconder. Charles afastou-se do fogo, segurando o selo real, com as mãos trêmulas, percebendo que o seu maior desafio não era a diplomacia estrangeira. Era a batalha dentro da sua própria casa. E algures, nesse mesmo escritório escuro onde as cinzas ainda se agarravam à lareira. Camilla sussurrou para si mesma, quase como um voto: não deixarei que ninguém apague este fogo. Se aquela chama sinalizava rebelião ou ruína, ainda ninguém sabia. Mas, enquanto a chuva batia nos muros de pedra de Windsor, uma pergunta ecoava por todos os corredores. O que leva realmente uma rainha a incendiar a sua própria coroa? Será que esta tempestade dentro dos muros de Windsor revelaria mais do que apenas a inquietação real? Vamos mergulhar nos segredos que transformaram os sussurros no ponto de ruptura de um reino. A rebelião silenciosa de Windsor. A tensão em Windsor naquela semana era suficientemente intensa para ser tocada. Sob o aroma dos cravos frescos e o brilho do chão polido, algo mais sombrio agitava-se. Uma tempestade silenciosa que ninguém ousou nomear. Não começou zangado, pelo menos não abertamente. Começou com uma reunião destinada a unir a família real em torno de um único propósito. Uma grande recepção ao presidente alemão Frank Walter Steinmeier e a sua esposa. O evento assinalou 27 anos desde o encontro entre as duas nações, e o Rei Carlos viu-o como um momento decisivo do seu reinado. No entanto, aquilo que considerava um símbolo de unidade, depressa desencadearia algo muito mais pessoal. Morning light streamed through the tall windows of the royal reception room, striking a table draped in crimson velvet. Stacks of documents lay in perfect order, and the staff stood poised, pens ready. Charles spoke with calm authority, his voice echoing through the polished hall. "This isn't just diplomacy," he began. "It's the image of Britain we're presenting to Europe." His gaze moved across the table. William, Anne, the Princess of Wales, and finally, Queen Camilla. He began assigning roles. William, with his steady charm, would lead the ceremonies and the opening toast. Anne, ever disciplined, would oversee security with the Foreign Office. Kate, poised, modern, and adored by the public, would manage the press and imagery. "The spotlight will naturally be on you," Charles added with a faint smile. Then came the pause, a brief, loaded silence before he continued. "Camilla," he said evenly, "you'll handle the banquet seating and reception room decorations." A seemingly small task, yet in that instant it felt like an insult carved into marble. The kind of slight only someone who's fought too hard for her place could truly feel. Camilla's gloved hands trembled slightly, though her face remained composed. William avoided her gaze. Anne adjusted her notes, and Kate offered a polite nod. No one spoke, but everyone sensed the sudden chill in the air. To outsiders, the Queen's role might have seemed fitting, even graceful, but to Camilla, it was a reminder of where she stood. For years, she had endured whispers, headlines, and humiliation to be beside Charles. She had weathered the public scorn, the comparisons, the pity, and now, in this bright Windsor room, her husband had reduced her to arranging flowers and chair placements. When the meeting ended, the others left swiftly, their footsteps fading down the corridor. Camilla stayed seated, staring at the paper before her. Her name, listed last, even below Kate's, seemed to glow like a quiet betrayal. The clock ticked steadily as she whispered, "Reception room decorations." The words dripped with irony. A queen in name, but not in command. By noon, Windsor was alive with frantic preparations. Servants hurried through corridors with trays of crystal glassware. Florists debated shades of roses. Secretaries answered phones non-stop. Yet Camilla remained behind closed doors. The tea, brought to her, went untouched. In the mirror, her reflection appeared calm, regal even, but her eyes betrayed her. Beneath the practiced smile burned a slow, quiet anger. Not from one insult, but from years of being underestimated. Her trusted aide, Mrs. Hill, hesitated before speaking. "Your Majesty," she murmured. "Shall I confirm the seating arrangements with His Majesty?" Camilla's tone was soft, almost playful. "No need, Mrs. Hill. Meetings are meetings. Decisions are decisions." She paused, her voice sharpening. "But tonight, we'll arrange things differently." Those who knew her said it wasn't the words that were unsettling. It was the way she said them. Calm, certain, like a woman who had finally stopped waiting for approval. That evening, long after Windsor's corridors had quieted, Camilla's private office lights burned on. The hum of the staff faded, replaced by the sound of paper rustling, chairs moving, names being swapped on cards that would decide who sat where. To anyone watching, it was a small act. Petty, even. But within palace walls, such acts carried meaning. It was her way of reclaiming control, however quietly. When dawn broke, Windsor looked as perfect as Charles had hoped. Yet behind the flawless order, something had shifted. A rift, silent but growing, had taken root. The Queen had done her duty, yes, but on her own terms. And as the grand doors opened to welcome the German delegation, Camilla stood beside her husband with her usual poise, the image of royal composure. But behind the calm smile was a mind already set on something. Something that would change Windsor's quiet balance forever. Because humiliation, once planted in a heart like hers, doesn't fade. It grows patiently, powerfully, waiting for the perfect moment to bloom. What hidden storm was already brewing behind those palace walls? Let's dive into the night when silence at Windsor turned into the spark of something far greater. The night Windsor burned. The evening at Windsor Castle was meant to be uneventful. Another polished chapter in the life of a king, preparing for yet another grand royal banquet. Outside, the lawns shimmered under the fading gold of the sun. Inside, silence stretched through the ancient corridors, disturbed only by the distant hum of servants preparing for the German president's upcoming visit. But somewhere beyond those polished doors, something far less ceremonial was unfolding. A moment that would leave a scar deeper than any public scandal. King Charles believed he had everything under control that day. The plans were finalized, the speeches approved, and the schedule polished to perfection. Yet, in a quiet study nearby, Queen Camilla sat alone at her desk, reading through the final version of the banquet program. Her eyes scanned the lines once, then again, until the truth hit her with cruel precision. Not a single word acknowledged her. No role, no title, no speech. In the pages that defined the state's most prestigious evening, Queen Camilla had been erased. That discovery, as small as it seemed, ignited something that had long been smoldering inside her. The years of being tolerated, but never truly honored. The countless public appearances where she smiled while whispers followed her every move. All of it suddenly coiled into one sharp moment of defiance. Those who later tried to piece together what happened would call it the 10-minute rebellion, a brief but unforgettable eruption that changed everything. By the time the palace lights dimmed and the corridors quieted, a storm was already forming behind closed doors. When Charles returned to the library after a late call with the Prime Minister, he noticed something strange, a faint flicker glowing from under the study door. It wasn't candlelight. It was too sharp, too alive. He stepped inside. Before him stood Camilla, still and unflinching, her pale hair catching the glow of a rising fire. In her hand, the state banquet file, the one he had signed earlier that day, the same one that had excluded her name. With deliberate calm, she took a pen, crossed out, approved by His Majesty King Charles III, and replaced it with slow, deliberate strokes. Her Majesty, Queen Camilla, presiding. Then, without a word, she sealed the page with the royal crest and threw the entire document into the flames. The papers curled instantly, their edges glowing orange before collapsing into ash. Charles froze. Anger, disbelief, and something close to grief crossed his face. "You've just burned your own dignity," he said quietly. Camilla didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, almost serene. "Dignity," she replied, "is for those who are seen. I'm just reclaiming what was taken from me." The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy, inescapable. Between them, the fire roared, no longer a symbol of warmth, but of separation. Charles tried to seize the royal seal from her hand, but she didn't resist. Instead, she smiled faintly, her gaze locked on the rising flames. "You can put out the fire," she whispered, "but not the memory." It was said later that the blaze was small, contained within the hearth, but what it destroyed couldn't be replaced. That night didn't just mark the loss of a file or a ceremony, it marked the quiet collapse of something sacred. The trust that had once held their union together was gone, reduced to smoke drifting across the old stones of Windsor. When Charles finally turned to leave, the Queen remained standing, silent, unbending, illuminated by the last flicker of the dying fire. Servants would later find her there, motionless, staring into the ashes as though watching her reflection disappear. From that night on, the whispers inside the palace changed. No longer about titles or public approval, but about the woman who dared to burn the symbol of her silence. And as the years passed, many would say that Windsor never truly recovered. For on that quiet evening, the royal fire didn't just consume paper, it consumed a marriage, a crown's illusion of harmony, and the last warmth left between a king and his queen. Inside Windsor's walls, could the flames have ended more than a fire? Let's dive into the haunting silence that followed, where duty, betrayal, and truth collided in the dark. The silent coup. At Windsor. The silence inside Windsor that night was heavy enough to touch. The air seemed to hum with something unspoken, something that had broken just hours earlier behind the closed doors of the royal study. The palace had gone dark early, but in the west wing, a faint light still glowed. Inside, Queen Camilla sat by the window, her robe slipping loosely around her shoulders, a forgotten cup of tea cooling beside her. Her reflection in the glass looked back at her, tired, angry, humiliated. Charles's words from the argument replayed in her mind like a cruel echo. They hadn't been loud, but they had cut deep. He called her reckless, accused her of overstepping, and in that tone, the one that made her feel like she was an outsider, not the woman who had stood beside him through decades of storms. The insult didn't sting because it was new, but because it confirmed her deepest fear, that no matter what crown rested on her head, she would never truly belong. By dawn, that hurt had hardened into resolve. Camilla wasn't going to cry or plead. She was going to reclaim control, quietly, completely. Around 3 in the morning, she summoned her loyal aide, Mrs. Hill, the woman who had been with her since her Wiltshire days. Hill entered, hesitant, already sensing what was coming. Camilla's voice was calm, deliberate. By morning, she said, I don't want to see a single old face in this palace. Not one. And just like that, Windsor began to shift. As the first light of October crept over the gardens, staff were called, offices emptied, and long-serving attendants escorted out through the side gates. The restructuring, as the palace memo would later call it, unfolded with ruthless precision. Vans arrived quietly before breakfast. Familiar faces disappeared before anyone could whisper goodbye. And by noon, new staff, hand-picked by Camilla herself, filled the halls. They were loyal, discreet, and most importantly, hers. The changes were more than cosmetic, though there were plenty of those, too. Every carpet was replaced with cream gold tones she said reflected modern elegance. Every royal portrait was shifted, Charles's grand image replaced with hers. And in the space that had long honoured Diana's memory, Camilla placed her own coronation portrait surrounded by roses. When one aide hesitated, she silenced him with a single sentence. We can't keep worshipping ghosts. The palace had never seen anything like it. Some called it decisive, others whispered the word revenge. But by breakfast, when Charles received word of what had happened, even he seemed stunned. His spoon clattered against the saucer as he read the report. 6 hours. That's all it had taken. The staff gone. The portraits changed. The entire atmosphere of Windsor remade in Camilla's image. He walked the halls later that morning, past unfamiliar faces who bowed first to her before him. For the first time, Charles understood that the argument in the study hadn't just been a quarrel. It had been a warning. What he dismissed as emotion had become action. Camilla hadn't shouted, hadn't threatened. She had simply moved with quiet efficiency until the palace itself answered to her alone. In a matter of hours, Queen Camilla had done what no royal decree could. She reshaped Windsor from within. And while the papers outside would never tell the full story, those who worked behind its ancient walls whispered another name for it, a name that spread in low voices through the corridors. Imagine if those quiet whispers held the truth behind Windsor's chill. Let's dive into the secrets that turned a royal home into a kingdom divided. The fall of the Queen of Shadows. The palace had grown colder that autumn, not from the weather, but from what lingered in the air. Once filled with ceremony and grace, Windsor now felt like a fortress divided. Every corridor whispered betrayal. Every polished floor seemed to echo a quiet war. The king's health had faltered, and with it, the balance of the monarchy. His doctor had warned him to avoid stress, but how could he, when the crown itself had become his greatest burden? Inside his private chamber, King Charles sat alone, his cough breaking the silence between the chimes of the old clock. Letters lay scattered across the desk, some unsigned, others marked urgent. The ink trembled beneath his hand as he reached for the phone. You must return, William, he said, his voice rough, almost pleading. Your stepmother is turning the family into a stage play, and the kingdom is watching. By nightfall, a black car arrived at the gates of Windsor. No photographers, no fanfare, just the quiet hum of an engine and the soft crunch of gravel. Prince William stepped out, his coat pulled tight against the wind. The guards bowed as he passed. Their eyes lowered as if even the air had learned to hold its breath. Inside, the palace felt strange to him. Unfamiliar perfumes, new paintings, and in the grand hall, the royal crest subtly shifted lower than Queen Camilla's portrait. It was as though history itself had been rearranged. He requested to see her at once. The servant who guided him looked nervous. When the doors opened, a wave of heavy perfume rolled into the hall. Camilla sat poised, a vision of calm defiance, her hand resting lightly on the velvet armrest. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. What brings the prince back? She asked coolly. Or has your father grown too weak to fight his own battles? William said nothing at first. He placed a file before her, a banquet plan Charles had refused to approve. His tone was steady, cutting through the tension like glass. I'm here to end this, Your Majesty, he said. The palace is no longer your stage. Camilla tilted her head, amused. You dare, she whispered. I don't threaten, he replied. The press already knows, and father no longer intends to protect you. For a moment, silence ruled the room. The candlelight trembled, casting long broken shadows across their faces, one representing the past, the other the uncertain future. William turned to leave, his final word sharp as the wind outside. If you wish to keep your dignity, disappear before it's taken from you. The door shut with a sound that echoed through the corridors like a closing chapter. Camilla remained still, her fingers gripping the chair so tightly they whitened. The queen who once commanded every corner of the palace now sat surrounded by emptiness. Outside, the clock struck 12, each chime reverberating like a warning from fate. In another wing, Charles stared out through the rain-streaked window. The paper before him bore his trembling signature. He was in state affairs. It was an act that fractured him completely, but he knew it had to be done. Back in the grand hall, Camilla's gaze drifted toward the fireplace. The flames had died, leaving only faint embers. The scent of roses hung in the air, fading with every passing second. Around her, the walls of Windsor seemed to close in, and the power she fought to control was never truly hers. And as the rain whispered against the windows, the woman who once sought to rewrite royal history was quietly being erased by it. Is this the moment everything shifted behind palace walls? Let's dive into how one headline unraveled the quiet power once held by Queen Camilla. The silent exile of Queen Camilla Cold. Careful and heavy with meaning. Queen Camilla temporarily withdraws from all public duties. The morning papers read, "The palace called it a medical leave, a short rest on her doctor's advice." But inside Windsor's shadowed halls, everyone knew better. It wasn't rest, it was removal. Behind the formal words lay a truth no one dared say aloud. That dawn, in the king's private office, Charles signed the decree himself. Rain tapped the window in slow, rhythmic drops as he lifted the pen, hesitated, and pressed his signature into the paper. His face gave nothing away, but those who stood nearby could feel the finality in the air. Without a word, he nodded to his secretary, and the document was sealed. By afternoon, no more flags, no photographers, just the dull hum of engines heading north. Inside the car, Camilla sat still, her face bare of makeup for the first time in years. She didn't ask where they were going. She already knew. The countryside passed like a fading film. Fields, signposts, the last glimpses of a world that had once belonged to her. She sat closer to an ancient abbey in the cold Yorkshire hills. When the car stopped, the nuns were waiting, black-clad, silent, eyes kind but cautious. They bowed slightly and led her to a narrow stone room. One bed, one chair, one small window. No mirrors, no gold frames, no silk curtains. A place where even time seemed to hold its breath. This is a peaceful house. Let go. But letting go was never Camilla's gift. She sat on the bed, staring through the misted glass at the bell tower beyond. Somewhere out there, the palace lights were still glowing. Charles's lights, William's lights, Catherine's lights. Theirs now, not hers. The woman who once stood beside a king had vanished into the grey folds of the English countryside. Back in London, the narrative was already written. The Times praised Charles's composure, calling him a monarch of restraint in turbulent times. The Guardian described the decision as necessary for the stability of the crown. Camilla's name, once daily headline material, faded almost overnight. No outrage, no sympathy, just absence. Days turned to weeks. At the Abbey, Camilla spoke little, ate less, and spent long hours walking alone among the wet gardens. Once, a young nun found her standing before the statue of the Virgin Mary, eyes fixed, lips barely moving. "Do you pray, madam?" the nun asked, softly. Camilla's answer came hoarse and distant. "No, I just count what I've lost." Her exile became a ghost story whispered in corridors. The queen who vanished after the Windsor scandal of 2025. The woman replaced not by another crown, but by silence. And perhaps that was the truest punishment of all. No dismissal, no disgrace, just a quiet erasure. Because in the end, it wasn't anger or rebellion that marked Camilla's downfall. It was invisible. The headlines moved on. The palace polished its image, and the bells of Yorkshire tolled faintly over the hills. Somewhere behind the abbey walls, the once queen sat by her window, listening. Each sound, the wind, the rain, the distant chime, reminds her of what the world had already forgotten. So, what do you think truly drove King Charles to banish Queen Camilla? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.